It has been an incredibly difficult week for President Volodymyr Zelenskyy of Ukraine as he grapples with mounting pressure both domestically and internationally. At home, he is facing a serious corruption scandal that has rocked his government, tarnishing his reputation and casting a shadow over his leadership. At the same time, he is under pressure from his Western allies, particularly the United States, which has presented him with a peace plan developed in collaboration with Russia. This proposal includes conditions that are deeply unfavourable to Ukraine and directly challenge the principles that Zelenskyy has steadfastly defended. The controversy surrounding Zelenskyy's chief of staff, Andriy Yermak, has only exacerbated the situation. Yermak, a man of significant influence within Ukraine's government, has long been a central figure in shaping both domestic policy and foreign relations. His actions and the actions of those close to him are now under intense scrutiny. Within Ukraine, there are growing calls for Zelenskyy to dismiss Yermak, who is seen by many as a figure whose power and influence have extended far beyond what would be expected of someone in his position. Yermak's controversial role in Ukrainian politics has long been a subject of debate. He is often described as wielding the power of a vice president, with his influence extending far beyond the ordinary confines of his role as head of the presidential office. Critics accuse him of exerting too much control over Ukraine's foreign and domestic affairs, bypassing traditional political channels and consolidating power in a way that undermines the checks and balances of the political system. However, there are also many within the government who support him, seeing him as an essential ally and an effective manager of Ukraine's complex political landscape. The current scandal, which involves a massive embezzlement scheme in Ukraine's energy sector, has raised serious questions about the integrity of the Ukrainian government. Anti-corruption watchdogs have uncovered evidence suggesting that officials close to Zelenskyy and his administration were involved in the scheme, which allegedly diverted hundreds of millions of dollars in state funds meant for critical infrastructure projects. The scandal has sent shockwaves through Ukraine's political system, and Zelenskyy is now facing mounting pressure to act. Zelenskyy's critics, both inside and outside of Ukraine, are demanding that he take swift and decisive action to address the scandal. Some argue that the president must dismiss Yermak in order to restore public trust and demonstrate a commitment to rooting out corruption at the highest levels of government. The scandal has already strained Zelenskyy's relationship with Ukraine's Western allies, who have been unwavering in their support for Ukraine's fight against Russian aggression. If Zelenskyy fails to take action, some warn, it could jeopardize vital military and economic assistance from the West and further undermine his government's legitimacy. Internally, Zelenskyy's political faction is becoming increasingly vocal in its calls for his leadership to take more decisive action. The scandal has exposed deep divisions within Ukraine's ruling coalition, with some members of the government demanding that Zelenskyy take immediate steps to address the corruption, while others urge caution, fearing that a rash decision could destabilize the country's fragile political equilibrium. Zelenskyy's allies in parliament are growing restless, and some fear that the scandal could lead to the collapse of the governing coalition if the president does not act quickly. Despite the pressure, Zelenskyy has so far shown no signs of backing down. He has repeatedly defended Yermak, arguing that there is no solid evidence to suggest that the chief of staff was directly involved in the corruption scandal. However, Zelenskyy's political opponents are not convinced. They argue that the scandal has tarnished the entire administration and that it is impossible for the president to maintain his credibility while Yermak remains in office. It is absolutely unacceptable that, amid all this, there are also some schemes in the energy sector, Zelenskyy said in one of his public addresses. His words were meant to signal his commitment to fighting corruption, but many saw them as a tacit acknowledgement that the problem runs deeper than he had previously acknowledged. For Zelenskyy, the stakes are incredibly high. He must navigate a complex political landscape at home, balancing the demands of his allies, the opposition, and the broader public, while also managing his country's ongoing war with Russia. At the same time, Zelenskyy faces a fresh diplomatic challenge from abroad. On the 20th of November 2025, the Trump administration in the United States presented Ukraine with a comprehensive 28-point peace plan, which has become the subject of intense debate in Kyiv. The proposal, developed with direct input from Moscow, includes several conditions that Zelenskyy has long rejected, such as territorial concessions in the Donbas region and limitations on Ukraine's military capabilities. The peace plan also suggests that Ukraine formally renounce its bid for NATO membership, a move that would be seen as a significant capitulation to Russia. The 28-point plan has been described as a deal-breaker by many in Ukraine. Zelenskyy has publicly stated that he cannot accept the terms of the proposal, as they would undermine Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. These conditions are simply unjust and unconstitutional, Zelenskyy said in response to the plan. The president's words have been echoed by many of his allies, who argue that the plan is an attempt to force Ukraine to capitulate to Russian demands under the guise of diplomacy. The US administration's push for a peace deal has raised eyebrows in Kyiv, with many questioning the motivations behind the peace proposal. Some analysts suggest that the Trump administration's approach is motivated by a desire to end the war quickly, even at the cost of Ukrainian territorial integrity. For Zelenskyy, however, the peace plan represents a difficult choice, whether to accept a deal that is deeply unpopular with his people and risks alienating his allies, or to reject the proposal and continue fighting with all the risks that entails. The stakes for Zelenskyy are enormous. His decision on how to handle the peace plan will shape not only his legacy as president, but also the future of Ukraine's relationship with its Western allies and its ongoing war with Russia. Rejecting the plan outright could lead to a deeper confrontation with Russia, prolonging the conflict and potentially leading to more Ukrainian casualties. Accepting the plan, on the other hand, could alienate Ukraine's population and undermine Zelenskyy's political credibility at home and abroad. Zelenskyy's handling of the situation is further complicated by his relationships with key political figures in Ukraine. The growing calls for the dismissal of Andriy Yermak are symptomatic of the wider pressures Zelenskyy is facing from both inside and outside of his government. The scandal surrounding Yermak, combined with the diplomatic challenges posed by the US peace plan, has placed Zelenskyy in a precarious position. The outcome of this crisis will depend on his ability to balance the competing demands of his political allies, his Western supporters, and the Ukrainian public. As the situation continues to unfold, one thing is clear: President Zelenskyy faces one of the most critical moments of his presidency. The choices he makes in the coming days will have far-reaching consequences for Ukraine's future, both on the battlefield and in the political arena. The pressure is immense and the stakes are higher than ever. The corruption scandal and the peace plan have both highlighted the fragility of Ukraine's political system. For Zelenskyy, the challenge is not only to manage the immediate crisis, but also to ensure that his government remains stable and capable of governing effectively in the long term. Ukraine's future depends on the decisions made in these critical moments, and the world will be watching closely to see how President Zelenskyy responds to the pressures on all fronts. The events of the past week have made one thing abundantly clear: the road ahead for Ukraine will be anything but easy. With the war against Russia continuing to rage and internal political tensions threatening to unravel the government, Zelenskyy must find a way to navigate these tumultuous times. The outcome of the current crisis will ultimately determine the future of Ukraine and its position on the world stage. As the situation develops, President Zelenskyy faces an uncertain future. His leadership is being tested as never before, and the decisions he makes in the coming days will have lasting consequences for Ukraine and its people. Will he be able to weather the storm and emerge stronger, or will the pressures from within and without prove too great for him to overcome? Only time will tell, but one thing is certain: the stakes have never been higher for Ukraine, its president, and its future.